Hey guys, how's it going? Bored now, back with you, and it's going to be another Buffy the Vampire Slayer review. I'm really rolling with it this week. So this is going to be, oh boy, Season 1, Episode 8, I, Robot, You, Jane. Yeah, it's not a great title to start off with, is it? Yeah, this is one of the turkeys, folks. After two pretty good episodes and the season on the up the last two times, things really come crashing down to earth with a wallop in this one. So this is kind of the show's attempt to do like a satire. I should say this episode is directed by Stephen Posey, who I don't think made many more appearances, if any, on the show. Has a couple of writers I don't recognise neither, which might tell you something. But yeah, it's the attempt to do a satire on like the internet sort of age, or the growing influence of the internet. So I give it marks for sort of being ahead of the curve on that. I mean, it's obviously this is back in 1997, when it was still very much in its infancy, and you can see how, yeah, there's a good idea in here, but the problem is that it just comes apart in this sort of very cheesy, cliched, like robot type story. This really clunky sort of B-movie premise. And I think what really drags it down is that a couple of the sort of supporting characters in this episode are just really bad, really bland. Some terrible acting. Yeah, I mean, I would defend it slightly because I think there is fun to be had in it, and there's some good character stuff. But yeah, it's definitely on the lower end. It's certainly in this season, and I think any season. I mean, I think when people defend season 1 and they argue for it, then I sort of point to episodes like this because, of course, I think pretty much every season has bad episodes, but obviously after this season the standard is much higher. And yeah, I would still argue that there's not many episodes that are worse than this, but there's still enjoyable things in it. I, Robot, You, Jane. Of course, the title partly referencing the science fiction novel I, Robot, turned into a film with Will Smith, and of course You, Jane. And it's hinting that there's going to be some sort of kind of online romance, or that's the angle. And it is, of course, it's about Willow and about her meeting this guy online, this mysterious guy. And so it's kind of flagging that up to do with online culture and the fact that really you do meet mysterious people and you don't know who they are. And as it turns out in this case, the guy online, well, it's not a guy, it's actually a demon from a previous century, who gets sucked in. He's inside a book, and that gets transported to the Sunnydale Library, which is sort of how we open. And then all sorts of things happen and start going wrong, and he's the demon, that is Moloch, his name, is manipulating things and manipulating these two sort of nerdy guys to kind of do his bidding for him. But we'll get more into the episode. It's a pretty out there episode. So I think there for some there is some enjoyment to be had. But we open in Romania, believe it or not, and that's obviously it's building the backstory for Moloch. But yeah, it's just this super campy like period like opening where we see Moloch and we see these kind of stereotypical, guys dressed in period drab, and it's just so silly and dumb, and we don't actually need it because this could have been explained later in the episode. But yeah, they were obviously having some fun in the costume department for this opening scene. And it's after that I think when you first watch the episode and it opens like that, you'd be like, what the hell is going on here? This isn't Sunnydale, this isn't Buffy. Have I put it on the wrong channel? If you were watching it on TV. So it then cuts to the library, of course, and we sort of see Buffy with the book, and the book is a new arrival. And Buffy's in a really cute dress, I'll say that first of all. I love her dress in this opening scene. And we're introduced to Jenny Canada. She makes her debut, and it's a pretty impressive debut. I mean, I think she's one of the highlights of this episode. I do have quite a cool trivia fact on her, and that is that the actress previously, she was a dancer in Prince's band, his like live band, before she got cast in Buffy. So I'm guessing, well, whatever it was, a few years before this. So yeah, fun little fact I picked up when I was doing like a Buffy trivia once. Yeah, she once toured with Prince. So that's quite a claim to fame. So this is her debut, and she's in the library in this opening scene, and she's kind of banter with Giles back and forth, but they're sort of rubbing each other the wrong way. And essentially, she is the quite a cool hip teacher. She's a bit younger, I guess, than your standard teacher. I think she's probably meant to be maybe early 30s. I say early to mid 30s. I'm not sure I would go as young as, she could be late 20s. She does look pretty young, but around that sort of age range anyway. And so she's bantering with Giles, and they're basically having this argument about books versus computers, the methods in both of them. And obviously Giles, very set in his ways, is very against the growing technology age and computers, and so Jenny is kind of winding him up. And I think it's these debates in the episode which really make the episode. They're very entertaining, and they sort of play off each other very well. And I mean, it is one of the things I like about Jenny, just the fact that she is this a younger, hipper sort of teacher. She's very grounded and likable, and maybe a bit more progressive. And I think she's a good character, a good grown-up character to add to the mix to interact with Giles. And of course, they're gonna, spoiler alert, they're gonna have more interactions moving forward. But I think they're a nice sort of mix together. They sort of complement each other very well. And yeah, this computer versus books debate in this episode is very entertaining. I mean, when they're having another discussion later on, Jenny sort of bites back with something like, books are controlled by middle-aged white men and what have you, which isn't necessarily true, but it's sort of a great comeback on Giles, because it's kind of having a go at the institution. And yeah, the fact that they're in like middle class like California, so largely it is populated by sort of middle class white people. But yeah, it's a very entertaining debate. And of course, Giles has that classic line later, nearer the end of the episode, about books smelling, and that's their appeal, their charm, the history behind them, which is just beautiful. And Anthony Stewart Head delivers it so well. But and yeah, there's a line in this opening scene where Giles says something like, "I'll be back in the Middle Ages," talking about his researching. And Jenny leaves and just says, "Wait, did you ever leave?" Which is again a great comeback. But I sort of enjoyed the lines from Jenny, just because on the one hand, they're running Giles down in an entertaining way. But I think another great thing about them is that there's a flirtation behind them as well. You know, it's this really interesting, playful middle ground between them, more so on her part, and I think obviously he maybe cottons onto that a bit later. Then there is a spark here, and it becomes part of that. But we're also introduced to the nerds I mentioned, so Fritz and Dave. Yes, such geeky names, Fritz particularly, but I think they're two of the problems with the episode. And Fritz especially has these really awful lines. So he's just zoned into his own world. He's zoned into the computer in the library. And he has one of the worst pieces of dialogue you'll ever hear. And everyone knows it. It's so notorious. But he just says, if you're not jacked in, you're not alive, baby. He doesn't say baby, I'm just adding that. Just so terrible. And again, I sort of love Jenny's reaction, basically, because she's like, obviously she's more grounded, and she's like, oh, thanks, Fritz, for making us, computer nerds look like total maniacs or something. But yeah, Fritz is the worst. It's just so on the nose, his dialogue, and the actor is really, really bad. There's a later scene where he's just again on his own, and he's on the computer, he's staring at the screen, and he just keeps repeating, I'm jacked in, I'm jacked in, I'm jacked in, over and over again. It's really bad. And Dave isn't much better. He's just this really vanilla sort of guy. He's meant to be the more sensitive one, and the idea is that Fritz is sort of bullying him, and obviously Moloch is sort of orchestrating this whole thing. But yeah, Dave is like really super bland as well, and so I think it is some of the cheesiness with the Monster of the Week and some of the stuff with those guys that really let it down, really dragged the episode down. One thing I do like is the interactions with Willow and Buffy, and almost this role reversal, because obviously Willow starts telling Buffy about this guy she's met, and obviously Buffy's intrigued, she's supporting Willow with it, and then she obviously finds out, they've met online, his name's Malcolm, which I guess is a clever kind of alternative name for Moloch. So yeah, Buffy is obviously a bit more cautious when she hears about that, and I do like concerned Buffy, how she's like really cautious and how she's concerned about Willow, and she's honest with Willow about her concerns, but obviously is sensitive. She's not a jerk about it. But what I like about Willow and Buffy in this episode, and when you compare it to earlier in the season, so the pilot for example, is that they've sort of done a role reversal where I guess Buffy maybe was the more confident in that episode, or certainly would have been in pursuing boys and the whole thing, whereas Willow she showed up on screen, she was nervous, she was awkward, didn't really know how to interact with boys, was a bit of a social outcast. And not that Buffy is awkward now with boys or social outcasts, but it is a slight role reversal because Willow is now a bit more confident, a bit more willing to take risks, so she's obviously put herself out online. And in a way, Buffy's advice in the pilot seized the day. So yeah, this is another example of Willow putting herself out there and kind of seizing the day, and it's actually Buffy who's a bit more cautious. And I think that includes with Angel, because obviously Buffy made that decision to take a time out with Angel because the complications of him being a vampire, and how things had gone. So yeah, there's a change in Buffy and a change in Willow, and a sort of switch around. But yeah, it's an interesting episode for Willow because it sort of shows a development, and she is set up as this potential victim, or that, the stakes are raised because it's Willow. But I think one of the problems with the episode is that's there in the first half, but it's not such a factor in the second half. It sort of witters away, and we're sort of left with the really bad monster of the week and the nerds. And I mean, obviously, it's still a factor because Willow gets kidnapped and she's there at the end of the episode. And it does come back to her, but in some ways, the focus is lost on that. I think if the focus has stayed with Willow, then it could have been a stronger episode. Again, some great lines from Xander. There's a line where he's talking to Buffy about the whole Willow situation and meeting this guy online. Because at first he says, well, I could say I'm a high school student. Just saying anyone can say anything online. Buffy points out he is, and then Xander says, well, true, but I could say I'm an elderly Dutch woman, and if I'm on the elderly Dutch woman forums, there's nothing to discredit that. Which is another great line from Xander. So yeah, some great stuff there, and some good work with the Scoobies sort of being concerned for Willow. And there are some really great scenes. Again, I think it's worth, kind of saying this, that even in a weaker episode, and this is maybe one of the worst, there are still strong moments. There's still good lines, good character moments. Yeah, it never sucks all together. There's normally at least a couple of scenes that drag it back up. And I think one in this episode is Puffy and the trench coat, sunglasses, and that becomes a joke because they suspect that something's up with Dave. Then he could be the guy who's contacted Willow on the internet, or that he's involved somehow because he's very intense, very hooked into the computer world, and is acting strange. So Giles obviously suggests Buffy trail him, sort of thing. And so there's a gag about her saying, well, what, so you think I'm just gonna follow him with a trench coat and sunglasses? And then she's shown doing just that. And I love that moment, that scene, because it's a great joke, but it's also a good visual because it kind of references noirs. And I think obviously in Buffy there's a big element of the high school noir / detective. So in the early seasons, obviously when they're in high school, that's a big part of the charm. So I that's a smart sort of reference to make Buffy looking like a femme fatale in the noir. And she also has one of the best lines of the episode where she says, my spidey senses tingling. So a great pop culture reference there. And of course it goes over Giles' head. And Xander actually might have the best line of the episode, because in a later scene when Jenny comes into the library, I think it's when Giles has called her in because they've kind of decided, we could do with Jenny's help because she's into this stuff, she's into the internet and online stuff. And so she comes in, and obviously she's surprised. She's like, oh, you kids are here. You're here again. You kids really are committed to library work or schoolwork. And Xander, to try and cover it, just this really cheesy line about to read books makes our English good. And what makes it even funnier is that Buffy then lays into him, she drags him off and repeats the line and says, "You idiot." And Xander is obviously really embarrassed. I think Buffy's reaction to it makes the scene and the line even funnier. So yeah, there's obviously still some good stuff going on with the Scoobies. But yeah, we should talk more about Jenny and Giles in the library, because they obviously find out then about Moloch. It dawns on them, and Giles realises then there's no information in the book he got. And it's the book which Moloch was basically transported in. And this sounds more clunky as I'm explaining it, but again, they're going back and forth, and Jenny says, "No, there's not much information in this book." And so they gradually figure out that Moloch has been sucked out of the book. He's basically been scanned out of the book and into the internet, if you will. So again, they were going for something very contemporary for the time, or ahead of its time. But yeah, sometimes in a show like Buffy, when they introduce these kind of technical elements, sometimes if it gets a bit too sci-fi, I feel it falls down. Or obviously it deals with robots later in the episode, and that's the form that Moloch takes, and that's really bad. But obviously it's something that the Buffyverse does from time to time, and sometimes the results work, sometimes they don't. There's obviously interesting examples in season 2 and season 5 which work much better. I think in this case it's just because the robot just looks like one of those cheesy B-movie sci-fi robots, and he's got the whole voice. I mean, the voice is really dumb, really terrible, and we hear him talking to Willow through the computer at various points, and I could never figure out whether they were actually saying that would happen, like you would have a voice from the computer, or whether it was just in Willow's head, so she was hearing the voice, imagining what the voice sounded like. I like to think it's that, actually, because I don't really know. I mean, I know nowadays, you can have computer with voices, but, this was back in the 90s, so I sort of like to think it's sort of in Willow's head more, and she's imagining his voice. So I lost the thread there. So Giles tells Jenny what's happened with Moloch, because they've sort of just tried to delete him from the system, and that hasn't worked. And Jenny isn't surprised, and this takes Giles back, because she says she knows because of all the power outages recently. And it's when Giles says, "You don't seem terribly surprised." She says, "Well, no, I'm a techno-pagan," sort of thing. So she's a techno-pagan, so that explains it all. But okay, fair enough. It's shorthand. It works well enough. And I guess they just need something like that to kind of initiate Jenny into the plot, sort of thing, into this world, because she's obviously going to be a character who's gonna stick around for a while. And it's always tricky, that sort of thing, because if you look at other characters when they've been supporting characters and they've kind of it's apparent they're going to stick around for a while, I think they've always gone for quite a quick way, or the character isn't surprised, there's a reason behind it. Whereas I think with other characters, it's either a big deal then they find out, or I guess it's more than they come up with some reason to hide it, and so they don't really find out. But yeah, I think in this case they just needed a convenient way, and it also leads to Jenny helping Giles, so that's sort of works well enough. So we get this big climax. So Giles and Jenny are working together, and again, a lot of the good stuff is with them in the library. So Jenny's using her computer skills. Giles is kind of mixing that with a bit of with a spell sort of thing, and it is a guilty pleasure. Anthony Stewart Head doing these spell readings, and he has a great line actually, where because she's like spelling something on the computer, and he says actually Canos is with a K, which I like him stopping to correct her. But yeah, then he does his whole OTT sort of thing when he's reading the line sort of thing. Really dramatic again. Great stuff. It reminds me of his delivery in The Witch when he's reading the spell out in that. And Willow has a couple of good lines actually in this scene, because they're sort of trapped. The robot has carted off with Willow, and obviously Xander and Buffy doesn't follow them, but finds them to try and save Willow. And Willow gets this fire extinguisher out and is like, "Hey, remember me, Malcolm? I'm your girlfriend, but I think maybe we should break up." And she smacks him with it, and then says, "But maybe we can still be friends." Smacks him again, and obviously it doesn't really work. But I love Alison Hannigan's delivery, and eventually the spell and stuff kicks in, and eventually Moloch is defeated. So it's a cheesy B-movie premise with some fun scenes, and Jenny makes a pretty solid debut as well. And the flirting sort of kicks in near the end, because there's a racy sort of corkscrew line. I can't remember Giles's that line, but he says something about the corkscrew, and I wouldn't just dangle a corkscrew on my head or something like that. I can't remember. But then she flirtatiously says, "That's not where I would dangle it," and leaves. And I think just the cut to Giles' face is actually really good. It's right on his face, and his kind of almost like he's sweating perspiration. It's great stuff. I do enjoy their interactions in this episode, and it's the same scene where Giles does the book smelling sort of line. That's the appeal, rather than computers and that having no smell. So yeah, beautiful stuff from Giles. Great delivery from Anthony Stewart Head. And actually, the final shot of the episode is very good. It's a good scene, actually. The Scoobies are all out by the fountain, and Willow's obviously feeling down and embarrassed because of her being suckered in by the whole Monarch/Malcolm thing. And, they sort of reassure her. Buffy says, "Don't forget, Willow, my sort of last boyfriend or crush since moving here turned out to be a vampire." And Xander said, "Yeah, don't forget, I fell for a praying mantis." And I like that, referring back to previous episodes. But it's a nice moment of camaraderie between the Scoobies, and it does make Willow feel better. And again, I do like those scenes. I like how they use that to pick Willow up, and how they sort of bond over that, because they all have these kind of really freakish, romantic sort of interests. And obviously that's life to a large extent. People often have these stories, and you can share them and reminisce and really pick each other up, So it's a great bonding moment. And then one of them, I can't remember who, says, "We're just doomed to be alone," or something, and it's played for comedy, and it fades to black. but also the detail of the fountain. You can hear the fountain going in the background, and as it cuts to black, you can still hear the sound of the fountain. So it's a really nice ending, actually. So it's a shame, actually, when you pick out moments like that and stuff with like Buffy in the trench coat and other stuff that is quite enjoyable. It's just a shame it's wrapped around this episode, but there you have it. There's certainly pleasures to be had, but it's on the lower end, definitely. I'm not gonna lie, but I always rewatch it when I'm doing a rewatch. So that's I, Robot You Jane. So please let me know your thoughts on it in the comments below if you have any. And yeah, favourite moments, worst moments, best lines, let me know. Just any thoughts generally on the episode. So thank you for listening, and I've just also put a preview of the Fright Fest Film Festival up. I will be going this week, and so there's a special preview video also up on the channel, and I've been doing glow reviews as well and many more, so stay tuned for more content. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.